Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here today from wherever you are. It is so great to have you here. And we're here to discuss the Climate Resilience Workforce Act, which was introduced to Congress this morning. And the bill was spearheaded by Representative Pramila Jayapal, who is here with us today, which is exciting. It aims to protect and to formally recognize the resilience workforce, the people who are helping us to prepare for and to respond to the many realities of climate change. So if you're here with us today, I'm guessing it's because you recognize there's really few more urgent things we can collectively do. We're joined also today by Saket Soni, founder of Resilience Force, which is an incredible organization that's been instrumental in the creation of this bill. And we also have the honor of being joined by Maria Lopez Nunez from the Green New Deal, and by Joel Salazar, a resilience worker, who's also a member of Resilience Force. And he has worked over a dozen disasters, and also by Hibako Osman from the Duwamish River Community Coalition. And then we'll also have Danielle Castellanos from Resilience Force, who will help us to translate for Joel and the Spanish-speaking audience. So first of all, just thank you all for joining us and for doing this vital work. And on a really quick personal note, I spent a lot of the last year following a group of resilience workers with Resilience Force across more than 20 extreme weather events for a New Yorker piece about this workforce. And honestly, it was very heartening in some ways and genuinely alarming in others to get a kind of nitty-gritty look at the nature of this disaster recovery work, the work that comes after hurricanes and fires and floods. And so I'm just really grateful for today's conversation to hear about why this bill has come about. So I think we'll start by turning to a quick video that's going to give you a glimpse of this up close through a worker named Mariano and others, and then we'll turn to the conversation.
Yo era pescador en Honduras, pero una sequía acabó con los trabajos de pesca y tuve que irme de casa. Eso fue en 2005, el año en que Katrina golpeó Nueva Orleans. Vine aquí y trabajé para reconstruir Nueva Orleans. Desde entonces he reparado hogares, escuelas y ciudades después de muchos desastres climáticos. Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Mariano Alvarado. Soy trabajador resiliente. Después del huracán Katrina, yo he estado como en unos 10 desastres. Y ahora que recién pasó Aida por acá en Luisiana, yo pienso que va a tardar más o menos como de 4 a 5 años para reconstruirla. Las ciudades, después de que pasan los desastres, quedan muy devastadas y muchas veces dormimos hasta en los carros. El que tiene carro y el que no, pues toca dormir en el suelo o a donde haya lugar. Y pues a eso nos arriesgamos, todo por ayudar a nuestras familias. Mi trabajo ayuda a estas familias volver a casa. Estoy orgulloso del trabajo que hago como trabajador resiliente. Agradezco mucho la oportunidad de ayudarlos a volver a casa y poder ver sus rostros felices.
Okay, so I'd love to just start at the beginning here. And Congresswoman, I hope you can just tell us a little bit about the bill. What is in it and why does it matter so much?
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for your excellent coverage of this issue. It's such a critical issue, and I think your story really gave life to the people that are involved and to the work that's involved and why this is so important for us to tackle. I also want to thank my friend Saket Soni, who has just been a phenomenal organizer from the minute I met him, because he's the one that really brought this to my attention in terms of the work that he was doing at the time. And it really goes back over a year and a half of work with many of the people and the organizations on this call. Even before we had started working on this specific bill, I had been working to bring environmental justice into the climate conversation for over 10 years. And I'm really thrilled that one of my constituents is here, and somebody who's been doing the work on the ground as well with the Duwamish River Community Coalition. Hibak, I think, will be able to talk some about the work that's been happening right here. But I think, we put a lot of work into this bill to just make sure we got it right. And a lot of the initial conversations I've been having have been people being surprised that it is so intersectional. And I think when I talk about why it's intersectional, I talk about the fact that that is the reality of this work. It's the reality of who climate change affects, the climate change disasters affect. It's the reality of who ends up doing the work, but often without the recognition, the training, the pay, the benefits, the labor standards. It is also about immigration, obviously, because it is immigrants who are doing the work, and sometimes they're doing it at great risk to themselves and without status. And so that kind of intersectional approach, which the Green New Deal has really prioritized and putting frontline communities at the center, has been really, really important. So what does it do? The Climate Resilience Workforce Act would create the skilled, equitable workforce that our nation needs if we're going to achieve climate resilience. And specifically, the bill creates millions of climate resilience jobs through grants to states, counties, cities, tribal governments, labor organizations, and community-based nonprofit organizations. It removes barriers to employment, and this is really, really important, in climate resilience jobs based on immigration status and prior involvement with the criminal justice system by providing a roadmap to citizenship for workers who are employed in climate resilience sectors or in these workforce training programs. And it prohibits employers from inquiring about criminal history before an offer has been made, and it provides protections against offer revocation. And again, just to say that these are already the people who are doing these jobs. And so we should recognize that by removing some of the barriers that people face. And then one thing that is very exciting to me is, as I started looking into this, I could not believe, Sarah, that there wasn't already a federal sort of planning effort, an Office of Climate Resilience, given everything that we've been seeing across the country with wildfires. You know, we're here in the earthquake zone in the Northwest. We just saw the tsunami effects from the earthquake in Tonga. Of course, in the South, we've seen hurricanes and tornadoes and all the other natural disasters for so long. There's no centralized way to plan and support planning from the federal government all the way down to the local and state governments. So this bill creates an Office of Climate Resilience within the White House that would focus on planning and worker protection and equity. And then it funds the development of regional, state, local, and community-based climate resilience action plans that, again, center the voices of frontline communities.
That's really great and really helpful. Thank you. Saka, let's turn to you. I know you've been a driving force here and you've been leading resilience efforts for over a decade. I also know how hard you work. I've been with you at 5 a.m. when you're going to the Home Depot corner to distribute food to resilience workers and to have conversations and to do the organizing. So why don't you tell us a little bit about why a bill like this is so important?
Well, just so glad to be here with you, Sarah, and with you, Congresswoman Jayapal. For those of you watching, if you haven't read the New Yorker feature on the essential workers of the climate change era, it's an extraordinary read and really goes deep into the problem. This bill that we're so proud to have worked with Representative Jayapal's staff on and are so proud to have Representative Jayapal as a champion on is in a way the answer, the solution. And so just in terms of the need, when Hurricane Ida hit last year, President Biden called it code red for our climate crisis. He said, the nation and the world are in peril. And hundreds of thousands of Americans could testify to that. They reeled from disaster after disaster last year. Hurricane Ida struck Louisiana, destroying billions of dollars in damage, including huge amounts of damage to housing stock in working class communities. Then it reached New York and flooded basements in Brooklyn. In October, Washington State endured some of the state's worst flooding in a long time. Water rose above first floor windows in one city, Sumas. 75% of homes apparently incurred water damage. Then in December, you had unusually warm winds in central and south US. In December, you had tornadoes across a state stretch. They destroyed the foundation of economic and community life. They destroyed churches, county courthouses, and more. And then a Colorado wildfire raged out of control because of a drought and hurricane-force winds. Thousands of homes were destroyed. So, all Americans, no matter where we are, need to be prepared for this kind of disaster. And our recovery depends entirely on this new workforce that's risen in the last decade. I can't overstate how important it is to have this workforce. After disasters, a clock starts ticking. And if home repairs are stalled, families can't come home. If schools aren't built in time, entire communities have to move away, and cities can lose their entire tax bases. We've seen when Danielle and I have gone into the Florida Panhandle, for example, to respond to disasters, entire municipalities inside counties in a death spiral because people can't come home to schools and homes that are left in disrepair, and tax bases evaporate. So as these disasters grow more frequent, workers find themselves on the move year-round. Instead of working one disaster recovery a year, they crisscross the country continually. You'll hear from one of our colleagues, a resilience worker named Joel. He and others are in a near constant journey all year to places where hurricanes, wildfires, floods, and tornadoes occur, increasingly in communities that never expected to face them. So this is our new normal, and we're not prepared. After Hurricane Ida hit New York, Governor Kathy Hochul said there are no more cataclysmic, unforeseeable events. She said, we need to foresee this in advance and be prepared. Well, this bill is a significant part of our preparation. The most immediate way to prepare for tomorrow's or next week's climate disasters is to arm and prepare the resilience workers on the front line who will be doing these repairs. Over the last year, resilience workers have overcome near invisibility. Today, this bill is a first and long overdue measure in Congress to meet our climate moment and secure and build the workforce we all need. So we are thrilled with the introduction of this bill. This is not just a bill to bring a set of labor protections and inclusions in this workforce for workers. It really is also a significant and much needed step towards climate recovery in every part of America, in the middle of America, in the South and Southeast, in the Pacific Northwest, and in the East, everywhere where Americans are worried that the next disaster might strike. This bill is the cavalry and sends much needed resources and workers to do the preparation and repairs.
Thank you, Saket. It's clear that climate change is already such a real threat to our communities. So not just this kind of hypothetical future threat like the asteroid and Don't Look Up. We're already seeing this manifesting in the day-to-day. So I'm curious to ask, what can we do to help mitigate the future risks, both through legislation, but also through community-based changes? And so I was thinking, Maria and Congresswoman Jayapal and Saket, I'm hoping you can paint a picture for us of what resilience looks like. And Maria, for this, I'd love to start with you to paint that picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for your question and inviting me onto this panel. It's great to be here with other climate justice leaders and especially with community leaders, right, in support of Representative Jayapal's Climate Resilience Workforce Act. I'm Maria Lopez. I'm from Ironbound Community Corporation in Newark, New Jersey. A lot of people don't think about Newark, New Jersey. They just kind of fly into New York, right over our city, and land right near our neighborhood in the Ironbound. We're a multi-ethnic, largely working class neighborhood, about 50,000 people, 4 square miles. But in those 4 square miles, there are 3 power plants, the largest garbage incinerator, the largest sewage treatment plant right next to the port, which is the largest port on the East Coast, the second largest in the country. So that's the neighborhood that we work in. We also work as part of a coalition in New Jersey, the New Jersey Thrives Coalition, which is all about community-based organizations that are rooted in environmental justice, racial justice, that are working for these investments. We're also part of the Green New Deal National Network, which includes 20 state-level coalitions that work, with grassroots groups and 15 national organizations. So we're here to proudly endorse this bill. And it's really important because, like, as I was describing our neighborhood, folks think climate change is hitting us all, but it's not hitting us all equally. When we worry about floodwaters, we worry about toxic floodwaters that come into our neighborhood. And during Superstorm Sandy, that floodwater from the river, it came in through that sewage treatment plant, and it was dragged into the jails that are housed in now industrial areas and dragged into our neighborhoods, where people had basements that were not just flooded with water, but flooded with toxic water. The people that were incarcerated were forced to clean up the prison and then suffered for long after with skin disease and other respiratory issues. Our neighborhood is still recovering from Sandy, but Ida, that crossed the whole country to get to New Jersey, it impacted us so deeply. People were locked in their basement apartments, and the mold and, like I said, all the toxic invasion into their home. That's why we need climate resiliency. It's been in great partnership with Clean Water Action and the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance that we've helped to advance climate resiliency in our state, right? So it just speaks to grassroots power of why you want to start with the bottom up and involve communities, because communities can lead. So in New Jersey, we've helped pass regional resiliency plans, right? That incorporate the community vision into getting green infrastructure investment, heat relief, and making sure that we're expanding cooling centers, right? We're so proud of all our accomplishments, but there's so much more work that needs to be done. And we need to put communities in the driver's seat, right? To be able to partner with municipalities and work together so that the solutions that are presented are actually for us, designed by us. And we're ensuring that workers can organize, despite any other difference and barriers. So this bill that's been crafted in collaboration with environmental justice advocates, that's why it's so amazing, right? Because it's going to require community resiliency collaborations across government, ensuring that representatives of the frontline communities, like the one I'm a part of, are a part of the process, establishing those community resiliency equity boards. It's going to create, it's so much of a list. I'm like, wow. Providing grants that help make it accessible to the frontline community organizations. I'll tell you, it's hard to keep this funded and keep it working. People take it for granted. We're stepping in where government has left a gap, and bills like this give me hope that that gap will be filled and that workers will then be, the workers that we're advocating for will actually be paid at least a $15 minimum wage, that we're going to remove the barriers that prevent immigrants from taking these community resiliency jobs. And there's so much more in the bill. I'm just going to summarize it, but it's saying it's really this bill will do a lot to advance climate resiliency planning across the country so that community-based organizations, neighborhoods can really lead the way in our future. And Representative Jayapal, thank you so much for your work on this bill. We're proud to support it as the Green New Deal Network.
Thank you so much, Maria. And Congresswoman Jayapal, I'd love to turn back to you if you wanted to chime in on what resilience looks like or means to you.
Well, I think you heard it so beautifully from Maria. I think that is really what the bill is about. And, and I think that in terms of why it's necessary, you heard what's happening in New Jersey. You can find a story like that in any part of the country almost. And certainly here in the Northwest, Saket mentioned the flooding in Sumas. I mentioned the tsunami waves after the underwater eruption in Tonga last week, the wildfires in Washington State. It used to be that you would have wildfires, maybe one or two bigger ones on the east side of the state. We're sort of divided in our state by a range of mountains, but you almost never saw wildfires on the western side of the mountains. And now there are so many fires springing up, even right on the western side of the mountains, that the fire crews are having to fight earlier, more, bigger, And it has really become a massive problem here in Washington state. And you'll hear later from Hibak, but we know that it is the frontline communities, whatever they look like in different parts of the country, they look different. But those frontline communities that tend to bear the brunt of the burden aren't included in any planning that might happen, and ultimately have to be the ones to pick up the pieces of these disasters. And the resilience workers are the people that are actually picking up so much of that burden, but often without the supports and the and the pay and the benefits and the labor standards that they need. But also, I think the ability to bring people together, because post-disaster work, and what I read in your piece, what I know from Saket, what I know from Danielle and Joelle's work, is that this is actually the work of bringing community back together. And I think that's a very, very important part of what Resilience Force does. So that's why it's needed. And I think, we need bold legislative action to mitigate these risks. And that's the reason I introduced the bill. And alongside this bill, I've also been fighting to pass Build Back Better Act, which would invest $555 billion into the fight against climate change. And much of that work, including the Justice 40 initiatives, where 40% of the investments, we have the president's commitment, will go to the frontline communities that need it the most. These are some of the ways we start to tackle this. And I've also been vocal about the need for executive action by the president in addition to legislative action, because if we are going to recognize that climate change is a crisis, that we are in a crisis right now, then we can't afford to not pull out the stops at every level. And I hope that this bill is the beginning of kind of a framing of what a vision looks like to actually tackle climate resilience and turn it into an incredible opportunity to build skills and to build a workforce, a supported workforce, and to rebuild communities with these frontline voices at the center of so much of that planning. So I'm very excited about the possibilities of what we can do and of changing the conversation really about how we address this and putting a real focus, a spotlight on the need to take comprehensive action like what we're proposing in the bill.
That's great. Now, Saket, let's turn back to you. And, I think many people who are familiar with Resilience Force know about all the time you spend organizing among the workers who rebuild. But in terms of what resilience looks like to you, I know you also spend a huge amount of time with families who have just had their lives pummeled by, as it was for you and I when we were in Louisiana, in Lake Charles, people who had just had their roofs blown off by Hurricane Laura and then get hit by Delta, and just the nonstop pummeling. So maybe you can tell us from both standpoints, like what does resilience look like from where you sit? Oops, I think we still got you on mute.
Sorry, to build on what Representative Jayapal said and what Maria said, millions of Americans, all Americans really, are confronting the climate crisis. But there's another crisis inside of that often gets overlooked, which is the vast and growing American resilience divide. People who are insured and wealthy and can self-fund their recoveries are able to come home after disasters, and certainly not seamlessly and not without pain, but they're far more likely to resume their lives and regain normalcy. But that's not true for the rest, for millions who are uninsured or underinsured, for millions who are living in communities on the front lines, for working class communities, be they rural or urban or suburban, for communities that are very disproportionately people of color communities and communities who were already economically fraught, living in difficulty before the disaster. For them, they're on the other side of the resilience divide and looking at a much harder battle as they try to get their lives back together. That's why the intersectional approach of this bill is particularly important, the bill sends millions to communities to help people regain a foothold through participating in the resilience economy, through resilience jobs, and offers a chance for the funding of long-term repair. That kind of help is really key to communities who are facing this growing resilience divide. The other thing is, the representative is absolutely right. Part of the work of resilience is the work of healing these communities, how to put something back together again that was broken. And, although we are having a really difficult conversation politically in the context of so much polarization in the United States, what we've always found is when we go to communities, no matter what their color, stripe, or political affiliation, after hurricanes, floods, and fires, people are focused on solving really practical problems. How do you put the schools back together? How do you put the community back together? How do you clean out that jail? These are the problems that a community starts to focus on. And by funding the planning of these efforts, I think in part what Representative Jayapal's bill is doing is funding a chance for America to come back together around some really practical concerns, where we will also, in overcoming those concerns, in doing that practical work, that's how we'll build bonds and relationships. So there is a healing component to this bill. I think all of that is really needed for communities on the front lines.
Great. Now I'd love to hear from Hibak Osman from the Duwamish River Community Coalition. Hibak, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your own work on this issue, what your community is facing, how climate change is already manifesting there, and what needs to be done to ensure resilience.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hibak Osman. I'm joining you from Seattle, Washington. To give a little background about myself before I begin, I'm 16 years old. I'm a junior at Chief Sealth International High School, and I'm also partaking in the Running Start program at South Seattle College. I'm honored to be speaking on this panel with you all, with DRCC, the Duwamish Valley Community Coalition. I have lived in South Park for about 6.5 years. I remember learning about air pollution in my neighborhood in my local elementary school, along with the health disparities that it brought. The effects of climate change were hardly ever talked about in my community. So when I turned 13, Polina, who works with the Duwamish Valley Community Coalition, kindly informed me about the program they started, the Duwamish Valley Youth Corps. And I was very intrigued that I haven't even learned about the program, so I decided to join in. The program helped me gain a better understanding of how many people perceive climate change differently. Certain groups will likely face greater challenges than others, but that would always be a fact. So climate change may especially impact people who live in poverty, elderly adults, BIPOC, and immigrant communities. And unfortunately, the South Park community check all these boxes. Growing up with asthma was difficult in many ways. Going to school in South Park made me wonder how come asthma was talked about so often and was so common in the neighborhood. For example, in my PE class, all the teachers were very considerate when it came to supporting and acknowledging the kids who dealt with asthma. For example, giving us frequent breaks throughout the class, creating more low-impact activities, and etc. Within my community, as being an African-American woman at that, many of us don't talk about the effects climate change has on us. So increasing the number of youth leaders advocating for climate change like me and talking with decision makers like you about how to improve their communities is important to prepare and ensure resilience. So there's a lot we can do as individuals, but just imagine what we can do as a collective society. And I just want to say thank you, Congressman Jayapal, for the work you do for our nation and especially for the state of Washington. Thank you.
Yeah, what a privilege to hear from you, Hibak. Thank you for what you just shared. And now I would love to turn to Joelle. I know you've worked more than a dozen disasters, and we're really lucky to have Daniel Castellanos with us as well from Resilience Force, who is going to interpret. So I'm going to pause Danielle, if you want to introduce Joel as well. I know he's just coming back online. I think he got disconnected here. So we'll give you a moment, Danielle, to introduce him and to translate for him.
Yes. My name is Daniel Castellanos. I'm a senior organizer with the Resilience Force. I'm working here in Louisiana right now with after Hurricane Ida. We are organizing the corners of in La Platte, Louisiana, in Houma, Louisiana, and in Kenner, Louisiana, 3 corners where all the workers are picking up to do the job to rebuild the. It's very cold right now here, and but the workers are still there. They continue doing their work. Many of them went to Kentucky after the tornadoes, to doing the job. But this is very, very important to see that these people don't rest. They go disaster by disaster, and they need protections. When I see Joel here. Joel.
Okay, fantastic. And maybe you can translate for Joel the question, which is very few people know about what this work actually entails for someone who does the rebuilding of communities after extreme weather events. And so, Joel, I'd love to hear from you about, what do you wish people knew about this work? What is it actually like from the perspective of someone who has worked more than a dozen disasters?
Bueno, Joel dice Sara que está contento que estés acá, y bueno, la primera pregunta, mucha gente no conoce qué es un trabajador, ¿no? Y qué es lo que nosotros como trabajadores desearíamos que ver que pase con esto, ¿no? Estás en mute, creo, Joel.
We know he's currently in a spot where he's actually on the job and may have a less than perfect internet connection. So maybe we'll give it a minute, and maybe, I know, Danielle, you've worked closely with him. You could probably also chime in on this as we wait for him.
Yes, actually he's in Colorado right now after he was called by with a group of workers to rebuild the city that was in fire. And clean up all the place. He's just finished yesterday, and he's gonna come back to the big group in the workers in Louisiana next week. But it's important that this is a worker that is in many disasters. No, right? He has a lot of experience. And this is the reason why we want him to speak, but unfortunately the internet is not the best in the disaster areas.
Right, that is one of the many perils of the job. Let's just check and see. Joel, are you with us?
Yeah.
Oh, here we go. Fantastic.
Yeah. Hey everybody. Hola, buenas tardes. Un gusto conocerte, Sara. Probablemente esté experimentando problemas con la conexión porque hay una tormenta afuera de nieve y está muy lenta la conexión.
Hi everybody, my name is Joel. Sorry for this, but I have a problem with my connection right now because there is a big storm outside, the place I am, no? And this is the reason of why I'm disconnected. Continúa, Joel. Bueno, te hicieron la pregunta, Joel. ¿Escuchaste la pregunta? La pregunta. No. Bueno, te preguntaron que tú como trabajador de desastres, ¿qué te gustaría ver por esta ley que está presentando la congresista Jayapal?
Esta ley hay 3 puntos que siempre entran en un desastre natural, y es que no tenemos ningún tipo de seguridad social, no tenemos ningún tipo de estatus.
Okay.
Voy a tratar de mover.
I'm sorry, he's trying to reach the best spot. I heard very breaking, but he said there are 3 points that usually we're struggling in the places, areas where the workers are. No, the first one is when we don't have any safety, in between the work that we are doing and the safety equipment that we use. No, the second is that we don't have many of the workers don't have a immigrant status, and they take advantage the employer for of that, no, and they don't want to pay us or they don't want to attend us when we have a problem. And the third one in mine is, no sé, Joel, ¿me puedes escuchar ya o todavía no?
Sí, lo estoy escuchando.
Okay. Dime entonces cuál puedes seguir con tu relato porque
sí, perdón. Entonces, siempre que me consigo un nuevo desastre natural, siempre me encuentro con estos 3 tipos de problemas. Y siendo un trabajador resiliente, pienso que son unas grandes debilidades para nosotros, porque no podemos continuar sin alguno de estos beneficios.
Every time I went to these places, to disaster areas as a resilient worker, I usually confront these 3 problems, and if we don't deal with that, we need the protections to go ahead and try to fix these cities that are to rebuild them. ¿Qué más?
En este momento, al menos aquí estamos experimentando una desabastecimiento de comida, no conseguimos ningún tipo de comida, no tenemos dónde dormir y aún así estamos aquí para ayudar a otras personas que no tienen cómo reconstruir sus casas.
Even though right now in this disaster in Colorado, we don't have food. For example, there are no food for the workers. Many of my co-workers don't have a bed to sleep. They are sleeping and outside in bad condition. No matter that, we continue being here. Because we like to rebuild cities.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that, Joel, and Danielle as well. I know you also came here to do some of this work after Katrina. So if there was anything else you wanted to chime in, I know you've done this work both up close as an organizer, but also as someone who has lived it.
Yes, finish to translate. Gracias, Joel, por lo que dijiste. Me pregunta a mí qué es lo que yo como trabajador y como he vivido, ¿no? Yes, unfortunately, this is we see the pattern, no? I start this organization with SACET after Katrina. I was exploited by my employer. They used our immigration status against us. To not pay you, to don't give you any benefit. But and that's it's a pattern. No? We see in the corners that one of the biggest problems that we have is the wage theft. Many of the employers use your immigration status against you, don't pay you. They don't want to pay you. If you want to complain against them, they immediately call immigration. And that's a big problem that we have. The second one is the safety equipment. A lot of accidents because the employers that go to these areas don't use to have the safety equipment to the workers, unless if you are immigrant, because you don't speak the language, you don't know the law. They make you doing the roof, when the people fell down, or they go into the ladder goes, and you get an accident. Many people in accidents in these places. And the third one is the collaboration in between the local police and immigration, because they don't understand the Spanish speaker or people of color like we are, they try to control us with the police. And this is another bad thing that we see. And there are many others, like we don't have a place to sleep, like Joel said. Many people sleep on the parking lots of big commercial places like Walmart or Home Depot in a car outside. And the other thing is that we don't have food. And we don't have the safety of being. We came to rebuild, to help. And the local authorities don't see that. They see that we are a group of immigrants came, and they are trying they thought that we are criminals, and we are not. We came to help. And that's and I want to stop here. It's very important that we get these protections as the bill Congresswoman Jayapal is presenting. It's important for us because it's going to change the scenario for us. And thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you, Danielle, and thank you, Joel, for sharing. I frankly didn't have any idea until I started following Resilience Force that almost anywhere you go after one of these major disasters, you'll find upwards of 100 people, 100 workers, some of whom have come from very far away, some of whom are more local, but who are sleeping out of their cars, living out of their cars for months. I'd love to kind of turn, since we don't have a ton of time left, there's so much we could go into, to just think through, what are some of the stories that are not being told? And I'd love to turn back to the Congresswoman to ask, what is one thing that you would like to communicate with the press, with the audience who are watching today, about the need for a nationally recognized resilience workforce? And, did you want to close us out with a call to action?
I love the call to action. Thank you, Sarah. I think this has been such a beautiful conversation about what really happens. And I really loved Saket's summary of saying that this is about funding the chance for America to come back together. I think that is a really, really important part of this healing and the work we're doing. And, when I listened to Hibak talk about what she's doing at the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition, it's just been so inspiring for me to watch that, because what she didn't mention is that is a Superfund site. This was designated as a Superfund site in 2001 by the EPA, and it is a very toxic place. It is a result of long history of industrial use and continued pollution. Over 40 hazardous substances found in the river sediments. People go to fish there. It has a large immigrant population, and before the Duwamish Coalition was created, people didn't know that it was toxic. And so these cleanup sites, and this is some of what Maria was talking about as well, combined with long historic cleanup sites, combined with the disasters that are happening now, they're all in the same sphere of crisis, right? They're all in the sphere of needing to be able to lift up the stories that have not been told in the midst of climate change from the communities that are disproportionately burdened. And I think, as you heard from Joel and from Danielle, so many of the workers who are actually doing the work to rebuild are doing so in poor working conditions with no pay, no benefits, and no voice in climate resilience planning. And so I think your article, Sarah, was a perfect example of how we need to amplify these stories. There are so many of them across the country, and they are inspiring. I mean, can you imagine the work that Joel is doing? He's right there in Colorado right now after the fires. I don't know exactly which thing he's working on, but all of these people that are going to rebuild communities. How do we as a federal government look at that workforce, the potential for creating millions of new jobs, for planning climate resilience better, for helping communities to heal? That is a real opportunity in the midst of challenge. And so that's what excites me about this project. That's what excited me about it from the minute Saket first started telling me about the work he was doing. It's why we've spent a year and a half drafting this bill, because it was important. And so I think the call to action is to tell the stories that demonstrate the importance of resilience workers, to talk to your elected official. We are getting co-sponsors for the bill right now, to lift up what this bill does, what it means to your community, what it means to you as an individual, and to say that this is a place where we can make a significant difference, where the federal government can help invest in good jobs that heal our community and that rebuild our country. And so that's the call to action. Tell your stories, tell the stories you've heard today, and then advocate to get legislation, to get people on this legislation, to lift it up and to eventually pass it into law.
That's great. And Saket, did you want to chime in as well with your own call to action?
Sure. It's tough to follow Representative Jayapal on a call to action. So I'll just lift up the last part of what she said, which is if you're sitting at home and you have a roof over your head and a basement under your feet, you are a constituent of this bill. If you have children in school or you are the parent of someone who goes to a university or a college, that is a building that needs to get stronger to face the next flood, fire, or hurricane. You are a constituent of this bill. If you live in the middle of America or either coast in America, or if you live in a zip code that's had a disaster in the last 10 years, you could be hit again. You're a constituent of this bill. And, you know, there is a sense often of exhaustion when we look at the coming climate crisis. There's a sense of, well, how are we going to get through this? Well, this bill, in introducing this bill, what Representative Jayapal is offering is a handle, a lever, a point of hope, something to get together around. We can actually pass this. We can actually send millions of dollars to places like Newark or New Orleans. We can make cities and schools and government buildings, university buildings more resilient. And what we can also do is look to a future where someone like Hibak, who is joining us here today, in the future can be a project manager around resilience and then move on to be an emergency manager and then move on to put all her expertise, that she's gaining now to use in making other communities resilient. We can have a future where someone like Joel Salazar, who's, ducking a storm to join this call today in a state, Colorado, that's just weeks out from fires. We can have Joel be a trainer of thousands of resilience workers and move them into careers. We can have a future where resilience is an economy that's just and fair. If we just follow the logic of this bill and continue to band together around Build Back Better and all of the other priorities of this administration. So just want to leave you with that and thank you, Congresswoman Jayapal, for being our champion. And thank you for your reporting, Sarah, that's cast such a light on this issue.
Yeah, that's powerful. One of the things that's coming into my mind right now, Saket, you'll probably remember you introduced me to Beliz Gonzalez, this incredible woman from Venezuela. She's an asylum seeker who is here now. She's worked many, many disasters, and I followed her over much of the last year. And I remember that one of the things that she said to me was, it's one frustrating element of the job is that all of the news cameras zoom in when there is a crisis, in the moment of the disaster, in the moment after the hurricane. And then all that attention dissipates when the workers actually come to rebuild, which is a process that, as everyone has talked about on this call today, can take months or years. And so she was really asking, what would it look like if people paid attention to the long haul, the arc of this work? And it seems what this bill, one of the many things this bill aims to do. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Congresswoman Jayapal, to Saket, to Maria, to Hibak, to Joel, to Danielle, to everyone who was joining us, listening on this call. And we just so appreciate that you're all taking the time to contemplate this important, could not be a more important issue in this bill that's just dropped. So thank you everyone for joining us, and look forward to seeing you all again soon.